Well, we're going to call the meeting to order. You'll have to tell me if you can hear me or not, because I don't know anything about sound systems. There's not near as many people as they warned me that there might be. So the meeting format might change a little. The committee, well, first I'll call to order. Do we want to do a pledge of allegiance to the flag?
Yes.
It took me a while to find the flag.
I did, me too.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have a new honored guest tonight, so Marvin would like to introduce him to the group.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I want to introduce to you Jim Schmock, our new executive director. Hello, hello. Second day on the job.
Well, I can go home now because I've gotten the applause, so I'm going to leave on a high note. So thank you. I'm glad to be here. I look forward to working with you in the association.
And for anybody that would like to, after the meeting, he will be available to meet people, I think. So unless you see him go out the door, then he won't be. All right, I want to introduce you to the committee. We have Scott Schmidt, John Diggins, Bill Hibbs, Yvonne Martin, Bill Waters. My name's Alan Rickardson. And we have Amy, who couldn't be here tonight, but she's on the committee. So I give her a name tag. So. All right, I got to go get the sign-in deal, and I'll be right back. Okay, I guess my understanding is when I got this job that we have, we're supposed to find out what the members want, find out how the members want what they want done, and make a recommendation to the board, and then we can go home. So that's the way I'm doing things, and I guess until somebody tells me different. All right? Since there's not many people here tonight, we're going to have whoever wants to speak use the microphone, and then we're going to have the members of the committee, if they have any clarifications or want to ask you some questions about to clarify what you said. If that's all right, that's how we're going to do that. All right, there won't be any time limit. Since there's not many people here, you can talk as long as you want. If people get up and start leaving, that means you need to wind her down. All right, anything, the members have anything to say?
I think that's the format we want to proceed with, so I think that's
Anybody want to say anything? All right, well, Marilyn's been here for an hour, so she's first.
Probably better if I stood.
Whatever you want to do is fine.
No. Thank you to the committee for volunteering your time, because I think it's appreciated, and I hope that you find it appreciated. And thanks for the everyone who works on compliance. Before embarking on the establishment of a laundry list of violations to be punished with fines, our compliance committee and its enforcement officers need to establish an overall rationale and set of reasonable goals. First, compliance regulations must recognize the nature of the community they serve. Many of us came here from highly regulated suburban environments for the express purpose of enjoying a relaxed, congenial atmosphere. Other residents are elderly and do not want to, I include myself, and do not want to spend our remaining days pulling weeds, further polluting our world with Roundup, or spending our Social Security checks to pay others to mollify an arbitrary or capricious compliance committee. Some of us are part-time residents and cannot keep our premises manicured to home magazine standards at all times. And I'm not making any assumptions about this new committee, and this is just my opinion. We can achieve the goal of enforcing standards that maintain our property values, ensure neighborhood safety, and allow nature a place in our world while still acknowledging and celebrating the unique nature of our island community. We also need common sense, flexible rules that take individual circumstances into consideration. Regulations must be both clear and fairly enforced. Surely we can find a common ground between the two extremes of allowing junkyards on every street and enforcing Maoist monocolor uniformity. Specific rules or exceptions to rules that I would like to see include, number 1, suspend mowing enforcement of vacant lots during bird nesting season. Ground nesting birds and other animals need a place to live and raise their young as much as we do. 2, leave palm tree frond trimming, hard to say, to the individual homeowner choice. There are environmental arguments on both sides, and there are also financial burdens to homeowners who are forced to trim their palms. 3, unless a homeowner has permanently turned his front yard into a mechanic shop, boats and other beach toys should be allowed in front yards. Again, I refer back to the whole reason that many of us chose to live here. And 4, the first priority of compliance officers should be to inquire as to why a homeowner is out of compliance before sending a nastygram. Our POA and its representatives should treat our community members and homeowners with kindness, courtesy, and respect, and I would say that's a two-way street as well. It's the foundation of ethical behavior, and POA board members and the employees they supervise were elected to represent and serve our community and not to rule it. And thank you very much. Now,
You want to hand that in? Does any member have any questions? No. All right, thank you. Okay, we have Ryan. Oh, sorry, we have Ryan.
Sorry, I didn't bring any prepared notes. I
No
just
problem.
kind of wanted to see the direction of this. I spend quite a bit of time on the different social media sites for the island, and you know, I came from a place where we had a term called Johnson County beige, where everything had to be painted a specific color of beige. If you ever driven through Sugar Land, you may know what I'm talking about. It's similar to that. I hate to see our island turn into that. I was targeted at one point by the old compliance officers because a section of our fence had been removed while we did some work in our yard. And I asked them, I said, it was Sam, and I said, Sam, are we required to have a fence? And she said, no. I said, then why are we talking? You know, it felt like we had sort of these arbitrary rules that came up. I think I would rather see us focus more of our time and energy on the new construction. I understand that we need to keep a certain look and feel to our community so that it stays the standards, but I think that while I'm of the opinion that our city doesn't invest as much in us as they should out here, they still have a purpose, which they have a code enforcement section for that reason. I think that I'd hate to see us duplicate that and spend time and energy on things that don't necessarily need to be spent from an island perspective, you know, on those things. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, it's a unique place that we live, that you can park an RV or a boat in your front yard, and that's okay, but you know, we've gotten into arguments about how a palm tree looks. It's kind of an interesting little juxtaposition there. So that's kind of what I'd like to see happen. Thank you.
Any questions for Ryan?
Yes.
Are you knowledgeable of city codes or know where to find those?
Generally speaking, yes.
Where do you see yourself lining up with city codes?
As far as
If you have a complaint,
well, I am of the opinion that I'm one that would rather try to work something out with my neighbor than to try to do the anonymous in on us sort of back and forth. I think that you create bigger problems by going through those channels. But, I mean, so I see your point, you know, that there needs to be a channel for that to go through. And from what I can tell that's happening at the moment is that we're more doing compliance by our compliance is now going to the city and saying, hey, can you look into this further? Can you make sure these lots get mowed? That's probably to me, that's probably the better direction, you know, to go with it. However, I would like to see the first step be something where we work as neighbors together. That includes the property owners association, and being something to where, you know, it's something where we work together to create an island community. You know, I know we're part of Corpus Christi, but we're out here on our own a lot. I mean, we just really are. I mean, we need to watch out for us together as a community, because I don't think that our interests are looked at first and foremost at the city level more than we can ourselves. So I mean, we are kind of our own community, and we need to treat it like that.
That's all I have. Anybody else have a question? Nancy? I'm not trying any last names.
Smart.
I have a pretty good school teacher voice, so I'll use the microphone, but anyway. My name is Nancy Tress. I live on Bullion Court. We've lived there for 20 years, and we watched our island grow beautifully. My main concern is we have a lot of homeowners who are not residents here. They're not day-to-day residents. They rent their homes according to our rules. They don't do, well, there's some overnight rentals, and the city works on that. And you may want to familiarize yourself with that, because that can be a problem. But I'm concerned about some of the rental properties that folks may live up in Idaho, and they very rarely come down and see their home, and they leave it in the hands of a property manager. And the definition of a property manager, at least the way I understand it, is that they should at least drive by once in a while to see how that property is doing and how the renters are doing in the property. I've rented a house, many houses actually, and we mowed the yards and kept the weeds down and did lots of things because we thought it was our responsibility. Many renters today don't feel it's their responsibility to do that. They don't familiarize themselves with the garbage pickup routine. They don't familiarize themselves with a lawnmower. They probably come without one, and that's fine. And I'm not talking about our military folk. Most of our military guys, they know what it's like to perhaps live on a base. And if their base commander doesn't like the way their house looks, they hear about it. I'm talking about some other folks that come in and live here temporarily or maybe long-term, and they don't take care of the property. The actual homeowner is never told by the property manager that it's a problem if the property manager doesn't stop by. I'd like to see this committee get in touch with the property managers that are in business here. There are some very excellent property managers. I'm not broad brushing this, but there are others that are not so much. And then some people just rent their home and they don't have a property manager. And they never come to look to see how their property is doing. And this is where we have problems with trash in yards. Very, very high grass. Inappropriate things being left that are rusted, et cetera, et cetera. And we're getting more and more rental properties out here. People have expendable income, and they're able to own second homes, and then they say, source of income. So that's one of my main concerns. Other than that, on the palm tree issue, it really blew out of proportion. I tend to agree with what the lady said. If a person can look out their door and see their palm tree, and not be concerned about perhaps roaches and other things that are living in the long ponds, that perhaps may not be our biggest concern. But my concern is the rental properties at this point now. And I think good communication going with folks. And we don't know, the POA does not always know when a home is rented. And we don't know that. So perhaps we need to look at having our homeowners designate that their home is being rented and who the property manager is, how they can be contacted. Even in an emergency last year with Harvey, we had people that were gone, and not only do they leave their house, but they leave their boat, their toys, and everything else. And the rental folks have never been through a hurricane. It's not their stuff. They don't care. They leave, and the stuff is blowing into other people's decks and docks and causing problems. So there we have it. And I want to thank the committee. I'm really impressed that it's a large committee, which is really nice. And I understand your next meeting is Monday night, Tuesday night. Something like that is in the paper.
It's gonna be Wednesday.
Okay,
The second Wednesday of each month, we're gonna have a meeting.
okay.
And we don't, depending on how many people come, we'll decide where it's gonna be.
And you'll have an agenda and that sort of thing.
The agenda will be out tomorrow. I didn't want to send it out too early because I didn't want to confuse people about what
About
meeting
what was what. And whenever you get in the business of suggesting to people what they might want to do, not everybody's going to agree. And that's just the nature of the beast. And people don't like to be told what to do. And that's the problem. So it's a communication issue also. Thanks again.
And this, Nancy, this may not be something that you can answer, but it may be something that someone else can, and that's this relationship between property managers, the renter, and the owner. Is there an agency or agent responsibility on contract normally for property manager?
I don't think it's, well, it's a contract between the owner of the home and the property manager. I think that one of the best people that will be able to answer that question is Sherry Sperling.
Okay.
She has coastline properties, and they do very good property management. Plus, she knows the realtor board, and that may be a place to start.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I also have an issue with the builders, some of the builders, again, not broad brush, but some of them leave a lot to be desired. I don't think I'd want to go in the kitchen.
Thank you. Alan?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, the committee, for volunteering. I've been a volunteer in a lot of organizations, and it's a lot of work, and I hope you get some recognition for it. I hope you do some good things for us. I've lived all over the world, 10 years in different countries, 30 years up in Dallas. And Dallas was we lived in a nice, very nice, what should we call it, bedroom community. Very nicely, neatly trimmed lawns, nice houses, and most of the people were professionals. But we didn't have a POA. We did have a very strict code, city code, and we had what I called, maybe not too nicely, the yard Nazis. And the yard Nazis always paid us a visit because we lived on the corner. We came down here to kind of get away from the yard Nazis, because we really don't want to do that. We want to respect everybody else's property, and we do that with our own property. But as a compliance committee, it would be nice for the homeowners to know exactly what you're in compliance of. And if you're going to make new rules or have rules that you enforce, have them somewhere where we can see them. And if somebody has a complaint, they can go to their neighbor. If not, they should be able to come to somebody in the POA and at least inquire as to why somebody's got a condition that, you know, you're not looking too kindly on. I appreciate what people have said before me. We rented a house here when we first got here. We've been here 4 years. And we took good care of the house. In fact, it never looked better, I think. Now we live adjacent to a rental property. I won't say who the manager of the property is, unless you want to know, I'll tell you later. But during Harvey, the fence flew over, and it's been propped up. And doesn't seem, no matter what we do, that they'll redo the fence, replace the fence, or trim the shrubs that hang over our property. And I'm not going to get up on a ladder with a chainsaw and try to cut them down. So that would be a big help on the side of the property management companies. Many people here don't live here. Half of them, maybe half of the people here are transients, or they come down once every 6 months. So it becomes a problem sometimes. It's kind of not a big concern of mine, but if there are rules, I'd like to know what they are. I think they should be reasonable and know how they're enforced. If they're going to be enforced, I don't see any enforcement. I don't see any enforcement. I don't know that the POA has ever levied a fine on anybody or has taken anybody to court. So I don't know that that's the answer. I don't think that's the answer. But having something that you can go by and put your hand on and say, you know, you really ought to be doing this, and if you don't, somebody's going to help you do that. But that would be a big step. And I think we can govern ourselves. I hope we can govern ourselves. My pet peeve, light pollution. We come to a place that we like because there's not many people that live here. We're lucky. We have a nice space to ourselves. I wish we didn't belong to the city, but that's a long story. That bridge was crossed a long time ago. And it is nice. You know, we have 8,000 people here, maybe 6 or 4 that live here all the time. It's a nice place to live. My pet peeve is light pollution. I like to look out at the stars at night, and I can't. I go out in my backyard, and the neighbors got big floodlights. All the neighbors seem to like big lights. I'm not sure why. I guess they're worried about somebody catching them in the driveway as they come home. I don't know. But I think we could be better in the area of that. And maybe that's not a big issue with a lot of people, but it is me, because I have neighbors that have large lights. And I've talked to other people too that live on the canal, and their neighbor has giant lights, and they like to sit out in the back, and they can't because the lights are always on. So, but other than that, I think compliance committee is a good idea. Self-governing is a good idea. Have rules, and everybody knows what they are, and they respect everybody. Hopefully we can all get along and not have the yard Nazis. That's all I have.
Any questions, anybody? Scott?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Joe?
We've lived on the island for 18 years, and we've seen it grow. And part of the reason that we moved here was the naturalness, and the fact that every house wasn't painted the same color and looked the same. All you have to do is drive down Yorktown and see Rancho Vista and Rancho Vista Village, and you want to just throw up. I mean, it's time to ban the beige, dump the gray. It's tropical Texas. But the most important thing is my husband is a community representative, and he's been reviewing the whole island. The empty lots. One of the things that neighbors have come to him about are the number of abandoned homes on the island. You don't realize it unless you live on a street with one. We lived on a street with one. Unfortunately, this was a late in life marriage for 2 people. The wife died, and then the grown children fought over that property for years until it went into foreclosure, and now it's a nice, beautiful home because it was sold. But this is a problem that a lot of neighbors have brought to my husband's attention. They've actually dragged him into their backyards to show them the destruction of houses by the fauna, because it hasn't flora and fauna, because the house is literally abandoned. Sometimes it's due to ill health. Sometimes you just don't know whether somebody's financial situation changed and they just moved away. This is something that needs to be looked into. I realize it's city codes that can finally come in, like the house on Dinah. Still hasn't been knocked down. It's been, you know, the wheels turn slowly. But also, as has been pointed out, we are a very eclectic community. We are a bedroom community with little kids that leave their toys in the front yard and their bikes, and that's part of a bedroom community. We have retirees that a lot of us garden, but when it's 90 freaking degrees, you don't have the motivation to go out and yank weeds and make everything spotless. Also, as Nancy pointed out, we have a big renter community. We also have a military presence. We have several Marines living across the street. They have been fabulous neighbors. And I think that's what we have to take into consideration. And one thing, people's idea of yards and gardening is a very subjective thing. It's like art. And a lot of people express how they like to live through their yard. Now, I was amazed at the different yards just riding from Bounty to here. I was totally amazed at the house on Gypsy with the flowers in the front yard. It was amazing. The zinnias, and he's grown vegetables and all kinds of cool stuff. He should never get any kind of a letter. I mean, yeah, some stuff is dying out, but that happens. That's the season. And I'd like to point out that one of our problems down here with compliance is our freaking weather. We went for 9 weeks without rain. 9 weeks. And then we got hit with 11 to 14 inches. What freaking happened? All the Johnson grass grew, all the sunflowers grew. And I mean, there were problems left over from the fact that there were 100 lots that the POA was mowing that we didn't even know we were mowing. So it has taken a while to get all the lots mowed. And you've seen that happen. There's not that many people, gardening companies, that are willing to come out here to the island for a reasonable price. So it takes time to get easements and empty lots mowed. So that's what I have to say. I mean, I love this island. I love this place. And you know what? I have a thing to say about the freaking palm trees. That's where the bugs are supposed to live. They get their food, they get their water. They're very happy living in your palm tree. And I mean, people, it's the South. So anyway, thank you. And thank you guys for asking our opinions.
You said your husband's a community representative. What is a community representative?
Well, it's the old compliance officer, but it's a new name and a new idea, and we're just here to help you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to, if I might, segue on to what you were saying about the abandoned houses. There was one on Whitecap and Sorrow. It was an abandoned house, and some
juvenile delinquents or whatever broke into the house, they were in the house, they were cooking meth in the house. And nobody knew about it for a long time until the PD got wind. But they had gone in through the back door and they were doing their thing, and it was spray painted the walls. And so abandoned places anywhere, whether it be the country or the suburbs or downtown Detroit, attract not so great people sometimes. So that's something you want to do.
We're out of names, so everybody's gonna have to go around again until we get out of time. No, I'm just kidding. Would you like to speak?
Guess I'm supposed to give a little history first. I'm Larry Butts. This is my lovely wife, Kathy. We've been here since '99. 18 years. We must have moved in at the same time. Anyway, I appreciate very much what you gentlemen are trying, and ladies, I'm sorry, are trying to, I just had eye surgery. I'm seeing everything blurry, so. I appreciate what you're trying to do. One thing I want to make sure everybody understands, every piece of property here has covenants attached to it. Every section's covenants are different. I looked at several areas on the island before I chose the area that I live in, which is, by the way, is off of Sorrow. I lived in near that house. Anyway, just because you can enforce something on Jitsi doesn't mean you can enforce it on Bounty. Or, you know, everything is different. So if you're trying to come up with a set of rules to govern the entire island, I, for one, will fight you. And the reason I say that, the reason I bought where I did, is because of the way the covenants were written for the area that I live in. I don't think anybody wants to live by somebody else's rules if they understand the rules that they purchased their property under. So you're going to have to find the lowest common denominator of the covenants. And that's how you're going to be able to really enforce island-wide. That's all I got.
Larry, we have a couple of questions.
And Larry, this may not be best answered by you, but if it's anybody else here that could answer this better, I'd like to hear it. Has there ever been any kind of a gap analysis performed on the different covenants in the various subdivisions that tell us exactly what the differences are?
Can you tell me what you mean by gap analysis?
It means the differences between one covenant. So if you have a practical,
you can kind of look like a
see
chart.
what those changes are between each.
Over the years, they have been compared and contrasted. Some of those rules have been attempted to be changed, but it takes an act of Congress, so to speak, because everybody has to vote, and if you don't vote, it's a no vote. So yes, and I say we because I've been on the board for a couple of years, but there's been some trying to get a uniform, and again, people don't want to be told what to do, and he's right. If people would read the covenants before they buy the piece of property, but not all realtors will show you the covenants is, they always say there's an HOA, there's a POA,
right.
And that's all they'll tell you. So you have to be probing, and meanwhile, most people who are buying houses are looking at number of bedrooms and bathrooms and the color of the walls. They're not asking the realtors for this information.
I took a look at 5 of those various covenants, and I did not see that great a difference between the 5 that I reviewed.
But there are differences.
There are. I'm sure that there are. And but I don't. How many different subdivisions do we have?
I believe there's
26.
26. Yeah, 36.
26. So,
you know, just, if you're looking at writing a blanket statement, the covenants that somebody purchases property under, you don't change them. I purchased my property and I have to live to these covenants on that property till the day I die or the day I sell it. You can write everything you want to write. It doesn't change what my covenants are.
Right.
And that's all you can hold me to is the covenants I purchased my property on. So you gotta find the lowest common denominator to be able to enforce it island-wide.
There was a comment made about realtors not disclosing the covenants, but at every closing,
Yes.
there is, the covenants are mentioned in the title commitment and in the title insurance. And if people don't read it, it's their own fault, but it's there and it's made as a disclosure. So whether the realtor brings it to their attention or not, it's at the title closing. Every time.
And they're giving it, but not everybody's gonna read it.
People don't read them, but they're there.
It's actually the title commitment, so they got it usually at least 2 weeks before the closing.
Exactly.
Larry, which one do you live in?
I'm not giving up my address.
I don't need your address, just which subdivision?
I think we went to the same, yeah, it's what is Tesoro 2, yeah.
What?
Tesoro 2, it doesn't matter.
Well,
It's
he
up
said
by
his was one of
Orchard
the
and
most
Way.
lenient, so I wanted to read it.
I did not say that.
No.
I said that the covenants that are there, we're absolutely fine with them. There's a couple others, there was things in them, I said, no, I don't want that.
Hey, there's a difference too between people that live on the water and then the water quote view lots also. So there's just differences. And the size, square footage of the houses are different.
Jim McFadden is.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Jim? Either one or both.
Jim McFadden, 3 Fathoms Bank. Kelly can tell me what subdivision that is, and I want to make a quick comment about the covenants. I do think that you should pay somebody to take a peek and figure out what the least common denominator is. The only thing I do know is some years ago we changed the fees. There were differences between the different neighborhoods. Not everybody has the same rules for changing the covenants anymore. Not everybody has the same threshold. Not everybody voted to make their changes. So just suggest rather than community input that you send it off as a question, because some of the community are already saying if you're going to impose rules, they've got to be reflected in our covenants, and some believe that the covenants will rule. So either make sure that's the case, or make sure the community understands why the law permits you to do something else. And the other point I'll make is about 1.5 years ago, I approached the board at the time and I said I didn't think that the fine schedule was properly applied. I felt that there were some problems with the use of Robert's Rules of Order and notification to actually apply the fine schedule. Since then, I think it's even been modified again, but I may be wrong. So to that end, I would ask you to take a look at the fine schedule and decide for yourselves if you think it's valid. And if it is, the fine schedule might be okay. I just simply think that the board should ratify or certify the fine schedule so that when somebody approaches it and they have to pay a fine, they can't say, look, the schedule's not valid. So if you're going to do it, I want to make sure it's valid and it's enforceable. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Well, thanks. Anybody else want to speak? No, Nina.
Is up.
I'm
I'm Nita Smith, and I have a few suggestions based on the years I've lived here. I think it might be useful if y'all did an analysis of past violations, because I suspect from what I've seen, there's a pattern. If you look at things about how many violations go to owners of multiple lots, I heard there was one person out here that owed 100 of the vacant lots, and that's where our weeds got so high there for a while. I don't know if that's true. And look at how many of the properties are owners are people who only own 1 or 2 lots. I think some of our problem may be with these investors or whatever, many of whom live out of state perhaps, and don't know the weeds are that high. How many of them go to rented properties? That's something else I've noted. Renters are not always so concerned about pulling weeds or doing whatever is necessary, or even notifying the owner, because they may be afraid the owner's going to, take it out of their fee or something. How many of them go to renters where there's a management company? And I've seen this happen. A management company should drive by and look, but they may not notify the owner. And the owner may have no idea until they get the nasty letter. That's not quite fair. So if you keep an analysis, are there certain management companies maybe that are not doing their job? Maybe we need to notify owners. This management company has 25 properties that have gotten nasty letters. How many of those violation letters go to part-time residents? I've lived on streets where half of the people on my street are only there part of the time. Maybe only on weekends. Some of them only come here in the wintertime because in the summer they live in Colorado or Wisconsin. Some of them only come here in the summertime because they want to go fishing, and therefore there's no full-time person living there. And what are the most common violations? That might be something to look at too. Is it the weeds? Is it garage doors that need painting? Is it lack of maintenance? And maybe focus in on those that are most common. And if you get those dealt with, if I have 1 or 2 weeds in my yard because I didn't feel like pulling weeds yesterday, you might overlook it. And what are the most serious violations? And how many violations per property? That would be something else. Is it just a handful of properties and they're each getting 3 to 5 violations? Or is it all of us that got caught with a weed? Look at the builders, please. When their sand blows into the neighbor's yard, it gets on top of their weed barrier. And God help them then, because there's nothing you can do other than Roundup 360, and that doesn't work 360. I had a friend that this happened to, and they ended up having to completely remove all the rock from their yard, vacuum up all the sand that came from the builder across the street. And that cost thousands of dollars. They filed suit against the builder. And this is why people get upset about the builders. The sand fences they might put up, usually not, and then they blow away in a week, and they never put them back up. And all the neighbors that are downwind from them get that. And if they don't, it goes in the streets and in our gutters. And then it ends up, in my pet peeve, the canals. Or it stops up our gutters, and then it backs the water up in our streets. Same thing is true of their trash. And anybody that's out working in this summertime, they're drinking water out of those plastic bottles. And they toss them, and they blow. And they end up in our gutters and our canals. And I've seen, quite frankly, very little enforcement of the builders out here. Palm fronds, I have none. I have neighbors that do. I pick them up out of my yard and tried to put them in the trash once, cut my hand wide open. After that, I'd pick them up carefully and pitched them back into my neighbor's yard where they came from. But if they're not picked up, those too go in the gutters. They stop up the gutters. I one time was out there when the street cleaners came out because I called them because the water was all the way across the street and not moving at all. They had their little vacuum cleaner, and guess what came out of there? Other than a solar panel from Hurricane Harvey, they got a lot of palm fronds out of there. They get down there, they get like this, they block it up, and there go our streets underwater, and our yards. So I don't know if there's a trick or what kind of palm trees, or I don't know if once a year is necessary for all palm trees, but I think there needs to be some regulation of those palm fronds. And waterfront has been ignored. I don't know if y'all are boaters, but if you get in the boat, and even before Hurricane Park, now it's understandable, excusable, because the deck builders are backed up. But a lot of these places have decks that are collapsing. The boats go into the water. They become hazards then for kayakers, boaters, anybody that's out there, because they have nails, rusty nails. And yet I've seen no talk whatsoever about compliance enforcement of the water side. And it's a really bad problem, as well as the people who build on top of our bulkheads. I know somebody that laid paving stones all the way across the bulkhead cap. It's pretty, but it's not going to do much when bulkhead repair comes around. And yet I've seen no talk whatsoever about looking at the waterfront side. That's all I have to say. No breaks, no complaints. Thank you.
Sir, would you like to speak?
Sure.
There you go. Thank you.
Hi there, my name's John Minners. I'm on 13902 Eagles Nest Bay. We all knowingly moved into a canal community with the understanding that immaculately manicured properties were not a requirement. Additionally, boats, trailers, RVs were allowed to be parked in plain sight as long as they're in compliance with local city and state codes. I'm in favor of continuing this general philosophy. We all know communities with HOAs that vigorously enforce the most minuscule and petty violations. I'm arduously opposed to such a level of enforcement. While I'm not wholly opposed to the POA enforcement of egregious violations of our covenants and city code, I am opposed to enforcement of petty violations of generally well-maintained properties. I think we all know a property is significantly distracting from the neighborhood when we see one. In my opinion, that is where any compliance efforts, if we choose to enforce anything, should be directed. This includes construction sites, which in my opinion are some of the biggest offenders on the island. If a compliance inspector pulls up to a property with a generally nice appearance, they should move on. A few weeds in an obviously maintained rock yard, trash cans placed neatly next to a house or garage, or anything to do with palm trees should not be grounds for enforcement actions. Additionally, I believe operable boats, trailers, and RVs with current registrations parked in compliance with city and state codes should be left alone. Bottom line, I would rather put money towards island security than property compliance. If we want to try and bring properties with severe violations of city code or covenants into compliance, I'm okay with that. Compared to the current level of maintenance on the island, we should leave properties that are maintained at an average level or above alone. I understand establishment of processes and standards to meet such a compliance program will be difficult, and unfortunately some subjectivity will be required. Empathy for an average property owner should always be at the forefront of any enforcement actions. Thank you.
I'll segue it into Ms. Nita. Going back 15 years or so, we did patrol the canals with boats, and we wrote letters. We, as the executive coordinator, wrote letters to the homeowner saying your dock is falling into the canal. You need to do something about it. We took photographs, and we got some response. But then that practice sort of stopped. They didn't find anybody, but we got some action as to the ducks, because people, kayaks are a big deal now, but people swim in those canals too, grandchildren and the like. Boarding in the head, not a good thing.
Sir, did you have a comment? Richard? You came in late, I didn't know if you got to sign in, so do you have a comment you'd like to make?
Thank you for asking me, and I appreciate that, but no, I just need to observe.
Okay. Sure. Here you go. Okay. She already gave me a written. Oh, okay.
It's kind of in relationship to the one you just talked about. I live on the K's over here next to the Presbyterian Church. And we have narrow streets, we have many renters, and we have many boat trailers out in our street. which is dangerous because sometimes you get a boat trailer on both sides of the streets. Sometimes you got a boat on them, sometimes you don't. And they have big trucks that they put in front of them. It can be dangerous. So I don't know what the rules are about parking boat trailers on streets, but I wish I knew.
They have to be attached to a vehicle.
Pardon me?
They have to be attached to a vehicle to park on the street.
Well, and we have had them parked where they come home at night and hook their truck up to it. And then when they go to work in the morning, they use it again. And there was one over there on over that way. Anyway, where somebody had burned out the inside of their boat and they left it there for a year and it never got towed. So anyway, that is my concern. And when I had a boat, I stored the trailer at a storage lot, which was a minimal cost, certainly kept the neighborhood better. And then I had one more question, which was, are there any rules about what we can park in driveways? Is there anything that we need to know about that? Because people do park strange things in driveways.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say?
I'd like to add one more thing.
Sure. You get paid extra for going twice.
Well, I wanted to kind of listen and then maybe think of an idea. But one of the things I saw that came up recently was kind of a discussion, and I heard you talking about long-term renters. I mean, we have this discussion between long-term and short-term. I understand the way it currently, I'm going to say currently stands, because I think that's going to be a challenge that's going to be another issue that's going to come up down the line, you know, for short-term rentals. I want to challenge people to think about the other side of it. I drive an Uber and Lyft one day a week, 1 or 2 days a week, just for some additional cash flow. And I can tell you that our industry gets a negative rap sometimes for some of the bad apples, but I don't think it gets a lot of the positive for the good that it provides to the community. And I think the same thing versus short-term versus long-term rentals. And I know this is something that I think is going to get challenged. It's already been challenged at the state level and shown that the covenants, you know, are not enforceable. Obviously, it's still a city ordinance, but that can be challenged at some point. I want people to look at this and say, there are ways that we can get the long-term rental companies to come into better compliance or be better citizens on our island. We have opportunities to put pressure on them. That's what already happens in the short-term rental market. When you use something like Airbnb or VRBO, both sides are graded. Both sides are graded on how well they either work with the client, how well they take care of the property, so the person that's renting it is graded, the person that is, you know, that is renting to that person is graded. As an Uber driver, if I get below a 4.8, I think it's a 4.8 or something in that range, I can't drive for them anymore. Maybe it's a 4.6, but it's a certain level that once I get below that level, I can't drive. So I maintain one of the highest ratings so I can continue to drive for them. There's an incentive for me to keep my rating up. Same thing with these properties. But the long-term renters don't have that. There's no real incentive, you know, for a renter to necessarily keep the rental company happy other than paying the bill and doing the minimum that they have to do. And the rental companies, they have enough of a turnover that there's not really an incentive for them to drive by every week because nobody is holding them accountable. There's not really an accountability like there is in a short-term rental market. So I know that there's this fear that if somehow we became able to have these overnight rentals, that somehow the island would just, you know, melt, you know, because all of these people are coming in. There is a system in place that keeps that from happening. We don't have that on the long-term rental market. There are some people that take care of their properties. There's some people that don't. And like I said, there's some rental companies that take care of their properties and follow up, and others that don't. So I just want people to kind of think about that as that comes up. I think that's an issue that you guys are going to have to deal with at some point, because I think someone's going to challenge it at the city level, and if the city feels like they can make money off of it, they may very well do it.
Any suggestions on how you would hold long-term rentals accountable?
Well, let me just say this. There was something that happened on our island that's kind of a hot button issue. I might have handled it a little bit differently and gone after the actual and started naming names of companies that aren't fulfilling their duties. I would use the avenues necessary to name those companies. I mean, I would make it something to where the POA can that's where you may not be bound by those covenants, where you can create some rules for these long-term rentals to say, look, if you want to be someone that's recommended by us versus not recommended by us, I mean, I think there's some ideas that we can come at, but absolutely, I'm naming names. So if there's a bad rental property company, I'm naming them, because they're making it, if they're not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing, make sure that their company name is known. And the ones that are doing a good job, make sure their company's names are known.
Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, you want to speak again?
Well, we had an Airbnb on our street, and at one point, there were over 7 different non-related people in that house over the weekend, and the house across the street's driveway was literally parked in front of. The city has since come in and told them they cannot run their Airbnb because they weren't paying the fees for a rental property of that kind. So I respect what you had to say. I like the idea of rating. It does prevent things, but it can create a problem if you've got a bad homeowner that's running the Airbnb. And actually, it's the worst house on our street at this point for weeds, rusted old not registered trailers, a half-burned palm tree stump. So you kind of got to look at everything, people.
With respect to the Airbnbs or short-term rentals, a lot of people that are permanent residents get concerned when there's different people coming in and out all the time, maybe not desirable people, and there's just a lot of transient, and that's not why we've moved to residential community. The city gets into it because they have a hotel motel tax, and that's what they want to collect, and they can't collect it on a short-term rental, and that's why the thing exists, and that's why you work with the city attorney to get them out.
With all due respect, Port A still thrives, and they have a very, very good short-term rental market. I'm just saying, I think there's two sides to look at. If it's regulated
There's
properly,
two sides of the story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Yeah, Port A is a mess. You can have a mansion on one lot, and like a trailer with a broken down bar on the next lot. That's the reason why a lot of people didn't buy in Port A, they bought here because there was standards.
my whole point is that I think it's something that somebody's going to challenge, and it may be something that we have to deal with. So I think we should have a plan before we get there. I mean, we're one of the only few places you can drive a golf cart in, in this entire state. We've somehow made that work. So my point is, there are rules in place, there are plans in place. I'm simply suggesting that it's something that's going to need to be looked at some point.
Larry?
Yeah, you were talking about long-term versus short-term. My understanding is to rent a home, it's got to be for 30 days or longer. And the only reason I know that is one individual that I know is renting his house on his fishing place. He'd get a 30-day rental agreement and then refund the people 28 days. Just a side note, it goes on out here.
Would you like to speak?
Yes, I would.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me okay with this, like that? Great. I'm Robert Aljo. My house is at 15629 3 Fathoms Bank Drive. I've got property behind me on 15630 Kumana. With respect to the short-term rentals, there was a thing a few months ago, a state law, I thought it was, wasn't it state of Texas, where the Airbnbs were allowed. And I know our POA, I think maybe it's the city code as well, a lot of our POA covenants mimic city codes, match them. And so this was a thing that was written up, apparently the law allows short-term rentals. I don't know if there's any resolution within our POA. It seems like we have to follow the law. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know exactly how that went, but that's something that should be noted, and it could easily be Googled. You could find it on public record, Texas state law, because there were some HOAs who challenged that. I remember that was a big thing in the news when that came up, and it was about 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6 months ago. So that can be found out. Okay, so there's a no bullying sign up here, and it shows up in the camera. I saw it as I was looking at some of the doing. See, no bullying, because it's a school, so there's no bullying. So I was bullied by the POA compliance department. About 3 years ago, I started writing up a lot on the social media on Nextdoor about, listen, how can our POA just decide what they want to write up? I mean, we're supposed to have protective covenants, protective covenants to protect our property rights as well as everybody else's in our subdivisions within this POA. But our POA decided back then, it was a previous board for the most part, who decided that they could just write up whatever darn rules they wanted, pretty much. They used a stipulation in the covenants that says that the Architectural Control Committee can make rules, and they also use something in the bylaws that says, hey, the POA can make up rules for the governance. Doesn't say for your palm trees or your lawn or your rocks or your gutters or whatever. But the POA went ahead and did that anyway. The POA made up a whole bunch of things, and they still exist. That's the problem right now. Sure, each subdivision has covenants. The covenants pretty much match. I've been listening, and I hear, well, the covenants are all different. Well, there are a few subtle differences. For example, the height of houses is restricted in some subdivisions. For example, I live in Portugal, 3,000 is Portugal. POA office is in Portugal. And so I looked up and it says, yeah, there's a height restriction of 30 feet, 35 feet actually. But there's some other subdivisions where there's some conflict about that. And I was like, well, they're saying that it's in their covenants, 35 feet. So I looked it up, and uh-oh, it's not. And for example, in all the Tesoro covenants, there is not a covenant like in mine and like many others that says the total height of a building on a lot can only be 35 feet. Now, there's supposedly a city code to back that up. But some of these subtle differences exist. However, when it comes to the compliance rules, I believe you're going to find them almost identical. I think they are, in fact, identical. Covenant to covenant, subdivision to subdivision. And they say, for example, the sort of ambiguous terms, you can't have unsightly articles. Then they also use in the same paragraph unsightly obstacles. You got obstacles, articles, and unsightly is, of course, a very subjective term. And nevertheless, there are some very specific covenants, all within 1 or 1.5 pages in the various subdivision covenants that get as specific as to say clotheslines can only be in a certain location. They have to be surrounded by certain things to be invisible from your neighbors. So that's a very specific covenant. Another covenant, separate line, different numbers, says if you're going to have antenna on your property, you can't have any guide wires or any antennae beyond the front property line. Very specific stuff. So I don't think our POA should really try to use the excuse that, hey, well, our covenants are just sort of ambiguous and general, because no, in fact, they do get very specific. So there's that. I was bullied after I started writing about 3 years ago about how can our POA just start making up new rules. I mean, I've been here 14.5 years now, and for the first 11, there were the covenants, and the covenants were the rules, and the rules were the covenants. And we were told that over and over again by the 2 different executive coordinators, became executive directors, whatever, like a mantra. Hey, the covenants are the rules are the covenants. Then 3 years ago, it was like, no, maybe not so much. We can write up whatever rules we want. That didn't go over too well. That started a revolution, and the side that wanted to write whatever rules up they wanted lost. And a lot of them got voted out. And one of them just left a few minutes ago. probably because I'm talking, maybe she's got football to watch, I don't know, whatever. But the thing is, I was harassed, I was bullied by this POA, by the compliance inspectors. They even tried to call themselves compliance officers. The POA director at the time said, no, they're compliance officers. I said, no, you can't do that. That's what the city, no, she tried to call them code enforcement officers, for God's sakes. Those are the city CCPD code enforcement officers. I mean, really. So I called the executive director, it was Maybeth at the time, and I said, you know, you're trying to call them what the city police officers are, because city code enforcement are actual CCPD. They made that change about 3 or 4 years ago. They put them in the department of the CCPD. And so they have badges. And they are code enforcement officers. And so then the POA tried to call our compliance inspectors code enforcement officers. I said, no. They said, yeah, we can do that. I said, no, you can't. So I called up city code enforcement department head, said to the POA executive director, no, you can't do that. So they had to stop doing that. So they started calling them compliance inspectors. Not bad. I gotta say, I have a problem with calling them community representatives. You were asking, what's a community representative? Hey, I'm a community representative. I call myself a community representative. Why not? I write on Facebook a lot. I write on Nextdoor a lot. I've run for the POA board. Came pretty close. So glad that Marvin got elected instead. Man, not just for my own health and well-being, but for the general protection of our property rights in this POA, and to have things managed as well as Marvin has been doing this. And he's been in here. I've seen his vehicle, his Jeep, or his truck. I mean, 40 hours a week for the last month and a half. He's been in here, and after hours too. And he's been holding this place together. And I'm so glad that I wasn't in that position. But I tried only because I felt how unfair our POA had become. It was like sort of a dark side had come over us. Like, how can you just start doing that? How can you just start making up your own rules? I mean, you know, we're supposed to have protections over our property rights, for gosh sakes, you know? We're not supposed to be bullied, you know? But if you have these standards, they called them at first, or they're gonna call them standards, well, we're also gonna call them rules. Well, no, we're gonna call them guidelines. Well, guess what? They all still exist. They're on the POA website right now. You've got a larger compliance enforcement staff now by one person than the POA had back when they were sending the, I'll say, bullies around. Some of them were. At least 2 or maybe 3. I don't know. Anyway, I was getting bullied. I was being told I couldn't have my boats within my fenced yard that could only be seen when the compliance inspector walked up on my property and looked through the only little fence panel that had been broken up at the top where she could see through. And I know that because that's what the city code enforcement officer, who was a former U.S. agent and was retired and worked the city code enforcement in his retirement, and he told me straight up, he said, this is exactly what happened. And she called you an asshole, and she said you're causing problems for the POA, and this guy's running for the POA board, and we need to put him in line. And all that's on record because I went to a Freedom of Information Act and got it through the city records, through the emails of the POA and back and forth. So all this stuff happened. So meanwhile, while you have these standards, guidelines, rules, I've been fined for them. I still have $200 of fines for palm trees. I got 4 separate $50 fines for my brown palm fronds. I have about 40 palm trees on my property because I've got almost 18,000 square feet, so I've got the extra lot. I like having greenery. My neighbors say they like my greenery. They like the way my property looks. For the people that just have cement, hey, well, you get to enjoy our greenery, those of us who like it, those of us who will maintain it. But I had a couple palm trees that were a little bit too tall for me to get up a ladder and risk my neck and spine and health to fall off a ladder. And I didn't see why I had to. There was also a squirrel in my front palm tree, the one that got fined the most. And my dog liked seeing that squirrel from her front window of her front bedroom where she likes to stay, you know, and that squirrel would run up there and she'd go outside, and that was a real thrill for her. And you know what, it's nature. So, but that's what the problem was, you know, and the problem is still there as far as the rules, or the non-rules, the made-up things. They're still there, and you can find them in about 6 different places on the POA website right now if you look. You can start looking for covenants, and then you can go to ACC, and you can find them, and they're called, what I said, standards, guidelines. But guess what? They'll still fine you for guidelines. And technically, they're still there. So, I mean, if the POA just all of a sudden went nuts and decided, you know, well, we're just gonna go ahead and turn our community representatives loose, and some are friends of mine, Pete and Denny, it was just yesterday, the day before, I was out using my weed eater on my palm trees around the edges and stuff, and I see one of the compliance inspectors driving back and forth about 3 times. And over the weekend, my friend and I and her little son were sitting under some of my trees by the back, and we heard what we thought was a swarm of bees, and it was a drone flying over my property, looking at my property. Now maybe this is just some neighbor curious, whatever. I wonder what he's got back there, because we can't see it, it's all landscaped. I wonder what the hell he's got back there, you know? But damn, you know, I mean, my friend, she's allergic to bees, and she was scared crapless, man. And for me, it evoked that same feeling in the gut, like being gut shot, you know, that I had when I was being harassed by the POA compliance department, which they're all gone now except one guy, and he's a great guy. I'm glad he's on. He mostly does the building construction stuff.
We need to give some other people a chance.
I thought I was like just filling time. I thought you guys were already done. I thought you were going to 8:30. That's why I just kept going and going. But you're right. You're right. You must be Alan, right?
I'm Alan.
Yeah, I'm Robert. Robert Allen. Nice to meet you,
Nice to
Alan.
meet you.
All right, let me shake your hand when I
Robert,
leave
what would you call the representatives? What would you like the POA to call them?
I'd say compliance inspectors is probably the most descriptive term, the most accurate term. It's not deceptive, whereas frankly, community representatives should be elected positions, and it's kind of trying to hide what they do, which is they're inspecting for compliance.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Hey, Robert.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, Bob, I've got a question for you here. I know you referenced this document here, I believe, Robert.
Yeah, well, I'll just take the microphone on me.
Yeah.
I know you want.
Is this on?
Alan was pretty sure he wanted everybody on the microphone. I don't want to violate.
I think you were referencing.
Where's Joe? Joe's watching. I saw him. He wrote something on there. Joe Minervini.
It was executed in November of 2016, so I'm thinking that's the document that, 3 years ago that you were talking about.
Well, there's several back then.
C,
There's several.
fee schedule.
What does it say? Fee
It's
schedule?
Yeah,
that's one of the
rules
6.
and fine schedule for Pottery Island subdivisions.
That's one of like 6 things that have similar rules or things about them. This one has dollar figures alongside of them on the right side column. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
So you're
you talking to the microphone though? Because when I was trying to listen on my phone, I couldn't.
I think what I hear a lot of people here saying is that you're advocating that this be placed in file 13.
Well, I would prefer shredded.
Okay.
And all the other things removed from the POA's website where they exist currently. Yes, sir.
Does everybody else feel the same way?
Yeah. Yes.
Take a raised hands, you'll see.
Start over.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know. I mean, I'd like to know how you feel.
Start
Do you
over.
believe that this is unfair?
Yeah.
Does anybody believe it's fair?
Don't know what it is.
You never, okay, you believe it's fair? Okay. And you're saying that there's more than this?
Oh, yes, sir. That's one that has the fines associated with it. I think one of the others might have fines too, yes, there are standards, there are guidelines under the ACC, and there are separate letters. And in fact, if you Google, you try and find the POA rules.
Standards. It's summary of standards annotated 2016 is what's on the website.
That's this.
And it starts with
Section 1, authority.
all projects, let's see, summary of standards for appearance of property annotated. And the first bullet is all projects shall be completed in a timely fashion and will have appropriate ACC permit, things and it goes on. It has some yellow highlights about shrubbery and trees and rock yards and all that.
Excuse me, it's the same deal, only it's a different sheet of paper. It doesn't have the fines beside it, but it has those things listed.
So these are generally the same. These are the standards that are
They're close. I would agree with Alan that they're close, but they're not identical in every case. Although the one that's annotated is merely the one that has the yellow lines on it, whereas there's another version, Summary of Standards, which doesn't have yellow lines, that's just not annotated. But there are also guidelines for appearances of property, and that's under the ACC, you have to go through that. There's several things where you have to go like from one pachinko to the next peg and then another one, and then you get, oh, here's a letter from the former board president that says you have to do this. And in fact, if you Google POA, if you have to word it a certain way, the first thing that comes up is this one-page letter from the former POA board president that says what you have to do with your properties.
Okay, thank you.
Brings up a good point about privacy.
Travis, you want to
and
use the
inspecting,
mic?
Why don't I leave the mic at this point, unless anybody has any other questions? Sir?
Especially like drones or private property.
Would you
looking at
please
private property.
use the microphone, sir?
Has all the members of the
Sir?
committee
Sir?
taken a background check?
Sir? Sir?
Williams?
Would you please use the microphone?
Okay.
My name is Travis King. I live at 13905 Hawks Nest Bay Drive. Robert had a really good point about compliance or community representatives looking at our private property, drones over the top of our private property, looking in there. You as a committee looking at our private property, discussing whatever's on our private property. So therefore, there's really big concerns about background checks and people, possible criminals working for the POA, volunteering for the POA. So I just wanted to know, and this is a brand new committee of people, so will this committee, the committee members, be taking background checks? And the community representatives, compliance officers, will they, or I don't know if it's required, will they be taking background checks or have they? I don't know.
We're not taking any questions, Travis. I was made fairly clear in all of our statements and agendas for this meeting. We're here to listen. We're not here to tell anybody anything. So we're not answering any questions today because this is the first time we've all met. We don't even know each other.
Okay.
So we can't answer a question.
So maybe
Sunday.
Okay.
Maybe Sunday.
So I would definitely put an input of feedback of you should be taking background checks, and the community representatives definitely should be doing that if they haven't already. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Tom, did you want to say something, Tom?
Tom Cable, 13750 Fathoms Bank. Is this on? I was temporarily on the compliance committee for a while, and one of the first things that I tried to do that wasn't done was to consolidate those documents on the website along with the original 13 fines and standards. And so two of the other ones on there are the community expectations, which predate those. And another one is what the compliance officers are looking for. To consolidate those on the community expectations, there's some additional things that are in there that are not in the fines and standards. One of those being lighting that people were talking about, not shining your lights on people, and something about dogs and things like that that are currently not in the standards. And so an early effort was to try to consolidate those issues to at least where there's one document, you only find it in one place, and you're not looking at multiple documents that don't match, and they don't match, and that should be taken care of, but that's pretty easy to do. The other thing, that since I'm sitting up here, we have representative government, and I think the problem that occurred with the fines and standards is that the board came up with their fines and standards, and then there was made the motion and passed it without public input. And what we're doing right now with the architectural committee is we're revising the rules so that there's a rule change to the ACC guidelines that the board will look at it, amend it, make a motion to pass it, but not pass it at that meeting. And in that way, people will have an opportunity to make comment before any rule changes are made. And that could be a month, it could be 2 months, depending on how the board chooses to proceed from there. And what I'm saying is, if the new standards, or whatever you decide to do, is approached in that same manner, then representative government works. You know, in other words, we have representative board members that are supposed to pass the motions, but doing it without public input, without lobbying by the community, or without the community having the opportunity, caused a huge problem. And so I'm just reporting what we're doing with the ACC, trying to do, you know, so that is that way. And I would recommend that that be the way to do it with the new fines and standards, whatever you come up with. The problem with town halls, and town halls are good, you know, I mean, it's a good way to get input. But, you know, like, we basically have 25 people here tonight, and they represent about 10 or 11 families, and so it's limited. I mean, it's just the nature of it. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you know, everything has pros and cons. And so I think that this other method, in combined with this, you know, will give you an outcome where people really had a chance to know what was going on before a vote was made by the board. Thank you.
I do have one question as a follow-up, sir. You indicated that you were previously on the committee. Is that this committee?
Yes.
This document that I've got here that Robert had mentioned, this has been filed with the county. Are all the documents filed with the county?
No, it's only that one document. And this document predates the committee. The committee, well, I won't go with this. Basically, when that came out, that was a disaster, okay?
This document?
Yes. In other words, because, you know, no one had public input, people didn't know what's going on, how did this happen, da-da-da-da, all of a sudden they're getting fines. There was no plan as to how to go about, you know, you just hire 2 officers and then say, go do it, okay, without any direction as to how to do it, or when to fine, or when not to fine. And so as a result, you end up with a disaster, right? So the compliance committee, the original one, was really kind of formed to solve that problem. In other words, there was too much regulation, it was over-regulation, didn't make sense, it was, you know, fix this. In other words, fix the mess that was created, and that was kind of its purpose. But the point I'm making that is that the committee was, after that was already passed by the board, and the committee had nothing to do with formulating that document.
Thank you.
Got 6 minutes. Anybody else?
Yeah, when I'm listening to everybody, basically you got to fix what was screwed up in the past before you can proceed to the future.
Or you can scrap it and start over.
No bullying.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. The new executive director is here. If you'd like to meet him and talk to him, the board is here for a while. If you've got something you want to say to him, thanks again for coming. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Good job. Thank you, Bill.
Starry, starry night.